Look at your motorcycle. If it has an inline-4 engine, a disc brake up front, an electric starter, and an overhead cam, you are riding a copy. The original rolled out of a factory in Saitama, Japan in 1969, priced at $1,495, and it scared an entire industry so badly that 3 rival companies tore it apart in their engineering labs. One country's motorcycle industry collapsed in its wake, and a magazine had to invent a whole new term just to describe what happened next. This is the story of the 1969 Honda CB750 Four, arguably the most influential motorcycle ever built. And while every major manufacturer clearly responded to its blueprint, not one of them has ever called it copying. But before we get to the copying, you need to understand what the motorcycle world looked like before this bike existed. It was a completely different planet. In the mid-1960s, if you wanted a serious motorcycle, you bought British, the Triumph Bonneville, the BSA Lightning, the Norton Commando. These were the kings. And every single one of them ran on a parallel twin engine whose basic architecture traced all the way back to Edward Turner's 1938 Triumph Speed Twin. That is not a typo. The engines powering the best motorcycles of the 1960s were fundamentally the same design from 30 years earlier, and they had some, let's say, quirks. They leaked oil constantly. There was a long-running joke that British bikes did not park, they marked their territory. But it was not entirely a joke. The vertically split crankcases were machined on tooling that in some factories dated back to before World War II, and getting a reliable seal was more of a suggestion than a standard. They vibrated hard enough to loosen your mirrors off the bars mid-ride. Your hands went numb after an hour, and if you wanted to start one, you kicked it with your leg. The ritual could and regularly did break ankles if the engine kicked back. For all of this privilege, you paid between roughly $1,500 and $1,900, depending on the model. A Triumph Bonneville ran about $1,500 to $1,650. A Norton Commando 750 could push close to $1,800. The BSA Rocket 3 triple cost around $1,895. Meanwhile, Honda was the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer by volume, but Americans didn't take them seriously. The Super Cub had sold millions, but it was seen as a cute little commuter bike, not a real motorcycle. Honda's biggest offering, the CB450 called the Black Bomber, actually outperformed many British 650s on paper. But American riders equated displacement with credibility, and a 450 just didn't cut it at the bar. Honda's United States sales had been declining since 1966, and their dealers were begging for something bigger. No mass-produced inline-4 existed for regular buyers. MV Agusta in Italy built exotic racing 4s, but fewer than 200 of their 600 touring model ever left the factory floor. Front disc brakes existed on cars but had never appeared on a mass-production motorcycle. Electric start on a performance bike was basically unheard of. All the pieces were sitting right there on the table, and nobody in the British motorcycle establishment could be bothered to put them together. But Honda could, and what happened next took less than a year. The CB750 project started with 2 moments happening almost simultaneously in 1968. Soichiro Honda, visiting Switzerland, watched a police officer dismount a Triumph 750 and realized how absurdly small Japanese bikes looked next to Western riders on Western roads. Around the same time, American Honda service manager Bob Hansen flew to Japan, walked into Honda's headquarters, and told the founder they needed to build the king of motorcycles. And it better not be a twin. Honda assigned the project to engineer Yoshimura Harada in February 1968. Harada had designed the CB450, so he knew what American riders wanted. His team started at about 20 people and eventually grew to 60. According to Honda's own heritage records, they introduced mainframe computer systems to streamline the development process, from plan modifications to production line planning. That was a remarkably advanced approach for motorcycle engineering in 1968. Harada's design brief specified 6 non-negotiable targets: high-speed cruising stability at highway speeds up to 160 kilometers per hour, fade-resistant braking that would not disappear in the mountains, minimal vibration, excellent lighting and instruments, extended service life, and, critically, designs that were easy to mass produce. That last one is the detail that changed everything because Honda was not building a showcase. They were building a product. The engineering choices Harada made were deliberate and, as it turned out, prescient. He chose a single overhead cam instead of dual cams, not because it was cheaper, but because it kept the engine compact and light. He used a one-piece crankshaft on plain bearings instead of the pressed-up cranks you would find in Grand Prix racers, because plain bearings were simpler to manufacture by the thousands. He went with an under-square bore and stroke to keep the engine narrow enough to fit between a rider's knees comfortably. And then came the brakes. When Harada presented Soichiro Honda with two options, a conventional drum brake or a hydraulic disc, Honda's response was immediate. Of course they would go with the disc brake. Nobody else had put one on a production motorcycle. They would be the first. The prototype was ready for the Tokyo Motor Show in October 1968, 8 months from approval to a running motorcycle. Think about that timeline. 8 months to design, engineer, test, and prototype a motorcycle that would redefine the entire industry. The press and every rival manufacturer were completely blindsided by what they saw standing on that show floor. Here is what the spec sheet read. A 736 cubic centimeter air-cooled inline 4 with a single overhead cam and 8 valves, producing 67 horsepower at 8,000 revolutions per minute. A 5-speed gearbox with a smooth wet multi-plate clutch. A hydraulic front disc brake, 296 millimeters in diameter, the first hydraulic disc brake ever fitted to a mass production motorcycle. Electric start with a kickstart backup for peace of mind. A steel double cradle frame, a dry weight of about 480 pounds, and a tested top speed of 124 miles per hour with quarter-mile times around 12.5 seconds. To put that in context, the fastest British twin of the era topped out around 115 miles per hour, weighed about the same, vibrated 3 times as hard, needed a kick to start, and stopped with drum brakes that faded after 2 hard pulls. But the number that mattered most came 3 months later, in January 1969, at the Las Vegas dealer meeting. American Honda president Kihachiro Kawashima stood in front of 2,000 American motorcycle dealers and announced the price, $1,500. Think about what that meant. A 750 cubic centimeter 4-cylinder with a disc brake, electric start, and overhead cam, priced at roughly the same as a Triumph Bonneville 650 cubic centimeter twin that leaked oil and needed a kick to start. According to Harada, all 2,000 dealers burst into thunderous applause. Hagerty would later note the CB750 held a $400 price advantage over even the BSA Rocket 3 and Triumph Trident triples, which were the closest British competitors in displacement. Honda was not just offering more technology, they were offering it for less money. Honda had initially projected sales of 1,500 units per year. They revised that to 1,500 per month, then 3,000 per month, and they still could not keep up. Early CB750s were reselling on the secondary market for $1,800 to $2,000 over sticker price before the first owner had put 100 miles on the odometer. The motorcycle press struggled to find words big enough. Cycle World called it the finest production road machine available and described it as a masterpiece. Cycle Magazine named it the most sophisticated production bike ever made. Motorcyclists marveled that the engine had such an unusual amount of torque that the gearbox was hardly needed. The reviewers kept reaching for superlatives because nothing in their vocabulary quite covered what Honda had done. Remember, these were journalists who had spent their careers testing British twins that topped out at maybe 45 horsepower and needed a rebuild every 15,000 miles. The CB750 produced 67 horsepower, started with a button, stopped with a disc brake, and could run for 50,000 miles without cracking open the top end. The term superbike had started appearing in motorcycle magazines around this time, but it was the CB750 that made the word stick. When Cycle Magazine ran its landmark superbike comparison test in March 1970, the CB750 was the bike that defined the category. Every other machine in the test, the Norton Commando, the BSA Rocket 3, the Triumph Trident, was measured against it. And then Honda proved it could race too. The CB750 took a 1-2 finish at the Suzuki 10-hour endurance race in August 1969, just months after production began. It won the Bull d'Or 24-hour in September 1969, becoming the first Japanese brand to ever win an international 24-hour motorcycle race. And in March 1970, Dick Mann won the Daytona 200 on a CR750 racing variant in the bike's very first Daytona entry. That Daytona victory sent customers across America running to their Honda dealers, according to Honda's own heritage records. A bike that cost less than a Triumph, performed better than anything in its class, and had just won the most prestigious race in American motorcycling. The competition was not just losing, they were being humiliated. Now, here is where the copying starts, and the first story is genuinely wild, because Kawasaki had actually been building their own inline four before Honda revealed the CB750. Starting in 1967, a full year earlier, Kawasaki engine chief Gyoichi Inamura and product planner Sam Tanegashima had been developing a 750 cubic centimeter inline four under the internal codename New York Steak. That name came directly from Kawasaki's president, who later explained to Motorcyclist magazine that in America, the best thing on the menu was New York Steak. Their motorcycle was going to be the best thing on the menu. By September 1968, Kawasaki had a wooden mock-up of their 750 cubic centimeter bike. Then the following month, Honda unveiled the CB750 at the Tokyo Motor Show. And the news, by every account, was devastating inside Kawasaki's engineering department. The problem was obvious. If Kawasaki released a 750 cubic centimeter inline four now, the entire world would say they copied Honda, even though development had been parallel. So Kawasaki made a decision that was equal parts brilliant and petty. They shelved the 750 cubic centimeter project, bumped the displacement up to 903 cubic centimeters, added dual overhead cams instead of Honda's single cam, and committed to beating the CB750 in every single measurable specification. Designer Ken Tada insisted on stamping the letters DOHC prominently on the engine side cover. When Inamura pointed out that anyone could see the twin cams just by looking at the engine, Tada's response was perfect. The lettering highlighted a clear difference from Honda's SOHC design. It spoke performance even to people who had no idea what it meant. And then Kawasaki did something that sounds made up, but is thoroughly documented in David Sheehan's book, The Kawasaki Z1 Story, and corroborated by Australian Motorcycle News. In early 1972, they shipped 2 pre-production Z1 prototypes to America for a coast-to-coast endurance test, roughly 12,500 miles from Los Angeles to Daytona and back, with track sessions at venues including Talladega Superspeedway. Riders Paul Smart and Gary Nixon pushed the bikes past 225 kilometers per hour on the banking. The prototypes were painted in Honda colors and fitted with Honda tank badges so nobody would recognize them. According to Kawasaki historian Alan Lambert, only one person at a gas station ever spotted the deception. The Kawasaki Z1 finally arrived in September 1972. 903 cubic centimeters, 82 horsepower, 132 miles per hour. It beat the CB750 in every stat on the spec sheet, and riders noticed immediately. The Z1 won MCN Machine of the Year 4 years running, from 1973 to 1976, something no other motorcycle had done before. On the racetrack, it proved just as dominant. The Z1's engine became the foundation for Kawasaki's racing program throughout the 1970s. Now here is where nuance matters. Kawasaki started developing their inline four before Honda showed the CB750. So calling the Z1 a straight copy is not fair. This was not photocopying. It was convergence under competitive pressure, followed by deliberate escalation. But look at the fundamental architecture. Inline four engine, electric start, disc brake, 5-speed gearbox, steel cradle frame, standard riding position. Whether Kawasaki arrived at these choices independently or in direct response to Honda, the result was a motorcycle built on the same blueprint. The Z1 was not an imitation of the CB750, it was an answer to it. And that is an important distinction because what happened next with Suzuki was far less subtle. Suzuki had been an exclusively two-stroke motorcycle manufacturer for 22 years. Two strokes were their entire identity. Their first response to the CB750 was the GT750, called the Water Buffalo, in 1972, a water-cooled two-stroke triple that tried to sidestep the four-stroke revolution entirely. It was a dead end. emissions regulations were tightening, and two-strokes were living on borrowed time. So, Suzuki did something extraordinary. They studied both the Honda CB750 engine and the Kawasaki Z1 engine in detail. Then they built what amounted to a heavily benchmarked evolution of both designs. The Suzuki GS750 arrived in 1977 with a 748 cubic centimeter double overhead cam inline. For that, according to the Yoshimura R&D archives, was developed based on Suzuki's extensive research on the pioneers of the four-stroke four-cylinder motorcycle, particularly the Honda CB750 Four and the Kawasaki Z1 900. And here is the detail that tells you everything. Suzuki's engineers redesigned the cam covers specifically so the engine would not look like they had ripped off Kawasaki's design. The performance targets and layout closely followed what Honda and Kawasaki had already established. They were not just inspired by the competition. They studied it, benchmarked it, and then changed the cosmetics so nobody would notice at a glance. Then there was Yamaha. And honestly, you have to give Yamaha some credit here. They were the only Japanese manufacturer that actually tried to resist the template. Their XS750, released in 1976, used an inline triple-cylinder engine with shaft drive instead of a chain. It was a deliberate, conscious attempt to not be a copycat. Yamaha's engineers saw the four-cylinder machines from Honda and Kawasaki, understood they had to compete in the big bore market, but wanted to do it with their own engineering philosophy. The triple-cylinder was supposed to offer better torque characteristics than a four, while being smoother than a twin. On paper, it made sense. In practice, it did not matter. The triple sold okay, but it could not match the fours in performance, in sound, or in market perception. Riders wanted four cylinders because four cylinders had become synonymous with serious motorcycle. Honda had created that association, and there was no undoing it. By 1978, Yamaha gave in and released the XS1100, their first inline four. At 1,101 cubic centimeters and 95 horsepower, it was briefly the fastest production motorcycle on the planet. Cycle magazine called it a Rolls-Royce with a blown Chrysler Hemi motor. Yamaha had held out longer than anyone, 7 years. And in the end, they built a CB750 with more displacement anyway. The template was inescapable. So let's lay this out, because the numbers tell a story that words cannot. By 1979, 10 years after the CB750's debut, all four Japanese manufacturers were building inline four motorcycles across multiple displacement classes. And when you line them up side by side, the pattern is almost embarrassing. The 1969 Honda CB750, the 1972 Kawasaki Z1, the 1977 Suzuki GS750, the 1978 Yamaha XS1100, every single one uses an inline four engine. Every single one has electric start. Every single one has a front disc brake. Every single one has a 5-speed gearbox. Every single one sits in a steel cradle frame. The only things that changed across brands and across an entire decade were displacement and price. Honda started at 736 cubic centimeters for $1,495. Kawasaki went 903 cubic centimeters for $1,845. Suzuki matched Honda at 748 cubic centimeters for $2,195. Yamaha overshot everyone at 1,101 cubic centimeters for $2,989. Four different companies in four different cities, working with four different engineering teams, and they all arrived at remarkably similar solutions. The homogeneity was so total that Cycle magazine actually coined a term for it in 1976. They called it the Universal Japanese Motorcycle, conceived in sameness, executed with precision, produced by the thousands. That phrase was meant as criticism, but it was really the highest compliment Honda never asked for. When your competitors cannot figure out how to build anything other than your bike with a different logo on the tank, you did not just win the market, you defined it. If you're finding this fascinating, hit subscribe. I cover stories like this every week, deep dives into the machines and the history that shaped motorcycling. Now, the Japanese brands at least had the excuse of competition. They adapted to survive. But the British motorcycle industry, it was already in trouble, and the CB750 exposed just how far behind it had fallen. The response from Britain's legacy manufacturers was denial, then silence, then bankruptcy. The attitude was so deeply ingrained that as far back as 1960, Triumph's managing director Edward Turner had visited Japan, recognized the threat, and still concluded he did not think the Japanese motorcycle industry would eclipse traditional machines. By 1973, at the Earl's Court Motorcycle Show, one attendee later recalled asking representatives from BSA, Triumph, and Norton why they did not build motorcycles like the Kawasaki Z1. According to his account, all three gave essentially the same dismissive answer. Those flash-in-the-pan Japanese bikes would not be around in 5 or 10 years. Britain had been building motorcycles this way for over 80 years and would always do it this way. When he asked why British bikes leaked oil, the response, as he remembered it, was genuinely incredible. He remembered hearing, "Proper motorcycles leak oil." Whether that is word for word accurate or not, the sentiment was real. The Boston Consulting Group 1975 government report on the industry found that British manufacturers operated under the mistaken belief that the Japanese would never build serious large motorcycles. Meanwhile, American Honda dealer Larry Lilly captured the competitive reality on the showroom floor. He said he sold probably 20 CB750s for every Triumph Triple he sold. Every single die-hard rider who bought a Triumph 750 eventually traded it back in on a Honda. Lilly was a lifelong Triumph fan himself and hated watching it happen, but the British motorcycle industry had its head in the sand for way too long. The collapse was brutal and fast. In 1951, BSA, which also owned Triumph, was the largest motorcycle producer in the world. They employed thousands of workers across multiple factories. By 1971, just 2 years after the CB750 arrived, they reported a trading loss of £3 million. The company that had dominated global motorcycling for decades was hemorrhaging money. In 1972, the British government tried to save the industry by merging BSA and Norton into Norton Villiers Triumph, with nearly £5 million in public bailout funds. It was a life support machine for a patient that was already brain dead. In 1973, the last BSA motorcycle ever built rolled off the production line in Small Heath, Birmingham. A factory that had been building motorcycles since 1910 was gone. An 18-month workers' site-in followed at the Triumph Meriden factory, with employees literally barricading themselves inside the plant because they knew that once they walked out, they would never come back. By 1978, Norton Villiers Triumph was liquidated. The entire British motorcycle industry, every brand, every factory, every job, effectively ceased to exist. Triumph's name was eventually bought by businessman John Bloor in 1983, but he started a completely new company from scratch with Japanese-style manufacturing. Even the survival of the Triumph name required admitting that the British way of building motorcycles was finished. The British could not copy because they lacked the capital, the manufacturing capability, and the institutional will to do it. Their engines still used pre-war vertically split crankcases machined on pre-war tooling. As legendary BSA and Norton engineer Bert Hopwood documented in his book, the failure was one of management incompetence, internal jealousy between divisions, and fatal complacency. The CB750, at $1,495, cost about the same as a Triumph 650 twin, while offering technology a generation ahead. As RevZilla put it, no single thing killed the British motorcycle industry, but one of the biggest turning points was the 754. Now, some people might argue that other motorcycles have a stronger claim to most copied, and they'd have a point, except they wouldn't. The Suzuki GSX R750 from 1985 created the modern sport bike template. It had an aluminum frame, a full race fairing, and endurance racing DNA. Every competitor had a version within 4 years, but the GSX-R defined a segment, not what a motorcycle fundamentally is. And it only existed because the CB750 had already established the inline-4 as the default engine layout. The Ducati 916 from 1994 has been called the most copied motorcycle design in history for its underseat exhausts, single-sided swing arm, and Massimo Tamburini's stunning bodywork. But its influence was primarily cosmetic, and underseat exhausts actually fell out of fashion by the 2010s. The BMW R80 GS from 1980 invented adventure touring from nothing. Today, every manufacturer competes in that space, but competitors built their own interpretations, using parallel twins, V-twins, and various frame designs, rather than copying BMW's specific boxer engine and shaft drive layout. Only the CB750 changed what a motorcycle is. Not a segment, not a style, the fundamental architecture. And here's the thing that should make you look at your own bike completely differently. Walk outside right now and look at any 2026 sport bike sitting in a parking lot. A Yamaha R1, a Kawasaki ZX-10R, a Suzuki GSX R1000, a BMW S1000RR. You are looking at the CB750's grandchildren. The inline-4 engine layout that the CB750 made standard is still a dominant configuration in high-performance motorcycles 57 years later. Disc brakes are on every motorcycle sold anywhere in the world. Electric start is universal, not optional, not a luxury upgrade. Universal. Overhead cams are the industry default. The 5-speed gearbox has evolved into 6 speeds, but the concept is the same. Honda's own press materials state it plainly. Honda invented the transverse inline-4 motorcycle concept with the CB750 K0 and forged the very foundation of motorcycling for generations to come. Think about how wild that is. One motorcycle, designed in under a year by a team that started at 20 people, set the template that the entire global motorcycle industry still follows more than half a century later. There is no equivalent in the car world. No single car model that every manufacturer copied so completely that the copies became the standard. The CB750 did that to motorcycles. The cultural footprint goes way beyond engineering. Arnold Schwarzenegger's T-800 rode a CB750 in The Terminator. Uma Thurman rode a yellow CB750 in Kill Bill. A CB750 K0 was displayed at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York as part of the Art of the Motorcycle exhibition, which drew over 1.6 million visitors across 4 venues and set attendance records at every single one. On the collector market, values tell the story of just how much respect this machine commands today. A standard restored CB750 commands $12,000 to $13,000. The rare Sandcast models, the first 7,414 units Honda built with hand-assembled permanent mold engine cases before switching to die-cast production, sell for $24,000 to over $44,000 in top condition. These early Sandcast bikes are identifiable by their rougher engine case texture, and collectors obsess over the serial number ranges like vintage watch enthusiasts arguing about Rolex bezels. A pre-production CB750 sold at auction in 2018 for $218,792, setting what was then a record for a Japanese motorcycle at auction. That record has since been broken. In January 2026, the one-of-one Bob Hansen CB750 prototype, the very first CB750 sent to America, sold at Mecum, Las Vegas for $313,500. Values have climbed steadily for over a decade, and they show no sign of slowing down. Between 400,000 and 553,000 single overhead cam CB750s were built during the original production run from 1969 to 1978. The nameplate survived until 2003, and Honda even revived it for the CB750 Hornet in 2023, though now with a parallel twin. The inline-4, the original made famous, has become so completely standard that using one is not a statement anymore. It is just a Tuesday, and that might be the most fitting tribute of all. The Honda CB750's innovations became so universal that they stopped being innovations. They are just how motorcycles work now. The CB750's genius was never in inventing new technology. The inline-4 had existed in racing since before World War II. The disc brake was adapted from an American aftermarket manufacturer called Lockhart. Electric start and overhead cams were established engineering. What no single patent could protect was the audacity to combine all of it into one mass-produced package at a price nobody could match. Kawasaki disguised their prototypes in Honda livery. Suzuki redesigned their cam covers so the benchmarking would not look so obvious. Yamaha held out for nearly a decade before admitting the 4-cylinder template had won. And the British industry went to its grave insisting that proper motorcycles leak oil. 57 years later, the proof is parked in your garage. Whatever you ride, something on that machine, the engine layout, the brakes, the starter, the cam arrangement, exists because a team of 20 engineers in Saitama built the future for $1,495, and nobody has stopped copying it since. The next time someone at a bike night tells you their Kawasaki or their Suzuki is nothing like a Honda, just smile. Because every bike at that meetup is the CB750's descendant, whether the badge on the tank admits it or not. If this made you look at your bike differently, you should see what happened when one company tried to build the motorcycle that couldn't be copied. That story is coming next. Subscribe so you don't miss it.